Hello. Hi,
Hi.
everybody. So
Uh,
today it's me, Alessio, Jude, and we have a guest. We have Ali Bushell.
yeah, nice to meet you both and to be here today. Thanks for inviting me onto the podcast. Should I say a little bit about who I am and
Yeah, go on. Then we'll
Yeah,
introduce
fantastic. Please
the two
do.
of us. We kind of do it every time, and then we'll see where we go.
great. So first of all, I'm a therapist. I operate in London and online. My main modality is internal family systems, but I'm an integrative therapist, so I use different approaches depending on client need, but it's very much heavily leaning on IFS. I'm IFS trained. I've also been an IFS PA on some training courses, so I've been able to help other people, and now I'm starting to take on a supervision role as I'm training in that. So that's the next stage of my career. And also, I'm an author. I've written a book called the Sex Party Handbook, which is all about sex parties, how they work, how to engage with them, the history of sex parties and group sex more generally, because actually it's not a new thing. It's actually a very core part of our humanity. So you can find that at Amazon, the Sex Party Handbook if you're interested. And I also have my own podcast called The Healers Guild, and you can find that on my website, www.alibushell.com in media appearances.
Thank you, Ali. So good to have you here with
And
us.
we'll put those links in the show notes as well so that people can find them and don't have to hold them in their heads, just if anyone's scrambling for a pen anywhere right now.
Yeah. Shall we introduce ourselves as well, Jude?
Yes, we should do that, Alessio. After you.
Sorry. Okay, so this is Alessio. I'm one of the co-hosts with Jude. We have been doing this podcast for a few months now, and it's Queer in IFS. We talk about aspects of IFS and diversity related to gender diversity, sexual diversity, and neurodiversity. I am an assistant trainer in the IFS world. Level 3, I always get confused. Like dyslexia coming in, certified therapist, approved clinical consultant. And yeah, very happy to be here with both of you today.
Thanks, Alessio. And I'm Jude, and I am also level 3 certified IFS therapist and approved clinical consultant. And occasional trainer, and we forgot podcaster again, Alessio, and podcaster, of course, with Alessio here.
Yeah. Also, I'm a blogger, by the way.
There you go. See, there's always
Very
more.
successful one, might I?
Yeah, yeah. If you haven't heard of Alessio, then you haven't Googled IFS.
But you know what happens? Sometimes people use my resources, then they meet me in person, but they don't realize it's me until after, which is beautiful. Anyway,
yeah. So also really happy to have Ali here as our first guest on the podcast.
Oh, I didn't realize. That was such an honor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No pressure.
So Ali, we're really, we met a little bit earlier. We know what we're gonna talk about. We don't know exactly what is gonna come out of our minds and what our parts and selves will say, but I want to read out the topic of the session just to get us going. So today's gonna be about the P of passion and the C of connection. How the self contains the desire and capacity for sensuality and sexual passion with others, and how we can identify burdened versus unburdened sexual dynamic. Such an exciting title, Ali. Tell us more about it, please.
Sure. So this came out of a conversation, I think, that I was having with you, Alessio, in one of our many coffees that we would have. And yeah, it's from my sort of position as a therapist is very much, it's not just that I'm not sex negative. I see sex as an inherently vital part of who we are. And I think it's been very challenging for the profession of therapy to try to really contain that and explore that in a way that then doesn't get messy with all of the kind of cultural burdens that we have around Christian faith, how a lot of therapy grew out of the medical profession, and everything was pathologized. And we also know that Freud was faced with the challenge of, does he actually speak to this massive unspoken that he uncovered in his work with a lot of women experiencing sexual abuse, and he decided he didn't want to. So the relationship with sex and therapy has been a mess all the way back to the very start. And I don't think IFS has really exempted itself from that. I think in creating a model of the self and the idea of quote unquote healthy relationships, because I find healthy and unhealthy to be quite judgmental terms, because who's deciding what it is? I think in creating that paradigm, there hasn't actually been a space for connection that is sexual, that is sensual, without adding something onto it that then problematizes it. And I'm kind of left wondering, okay, so what kind of sexual engagement or encounter is considered by the kind of the leaders within the IFS community as a good one, as a self-led one? What is that supposed to look like? Because I've never heard it discussed. I've heard the bad stuff discussed. I've heard about, porn and the firefighters there, sex and the firefighters there, shame associated with sex. But I don't actually remember or recall at any point there being any real conversation about what it looks like when there's a connection, when there's a capital C connection between two or more people, and this is within a context of sex. It's just sort of the nice, loving sort of hand-holding is very much kind of illustrated. But when it comes to something sexual, suddenly we don't really have anything to talk about. I certainly haven't encountered anything in this. And given that so much of the work I do with my clients means actually being not just sex positive, but sort of like sex embracing and saying, yeah, like your sexual dimension is okay. It's fine for it to be here. Actually, maybe it was made into something bad when it didn't need to be. Can we look at that as well as understand what it means for you now? I find for me, I think it's a little bit of a disservice to the IFS community that there isn't more conversation about this, because then all you're left with is the problematizing, all you're left with is the burden stuff, all you're left with is discussions about porn addiction or chemsex or all of the stuff that we know there are problems with. No one is, I don't think anyone is arguing that like chemsex really is a good, healthy, sustainable thing to be doing, or that 5 hours of porn every single day is a way to live your life. But where's the counterbalance? That's the bit that I want to know more about.
Absorbing what you say, and I've got a few things to say back, but I also want to give space to Jude, because I'm aware I kind of know these things because I heard them in our tea coffee conversations. So Jude, I've got something to say, but
I'm absorbing and I'm agreeing, and I'm really at the moment just taking it in. But I think you're absolutely right. There is that sense of sex when it's not I guess oversimplification, sex when it's not a problem, it's like, where is it? Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And what is it?
And what is it? Right. Yeah. And I'm really hearing, I guess, how much of the work you do, and I mean, I'm oversimplifying, I'm sure, is kind of undoing a lot of damage, a lot of unburdening and undoing a lot of damage around people's just authentic, natural desires and natural selves when it comes to sex.
Yeah, and actually, like, I mean, the room that I'm sitting in, my practice room, is, it is a very consciously non-heteronormative, it's non-heteronormative, non-mononormative. I make the point to everyone who's in it, including the people who are heterosexual or who are monogamous. I make the point that it's a space that means that they don't have to be, and that there are things they can learn from that. So there's things I try to offer, heterosexual people, the queer perspective, that can actually be quite useful to them, because it can give them a little bit more freedom around how they see their relationships or what they want. Not trying to pull them towards same-sex desire and say, oh no, you really want that. It's much as just saying, well, it doesn't have to look maybe quite like the way you thought it had to. And the same with like monogamy as well.
That's a really good point about, that sense of the assumed normativity. So if you're, I'm sure this is kind of tangenting off somewhere that we don't have to go right now, but yeah, there's that, that well, okay, I mean, this doesn't, so I guess imagine, well, I'm straight, this is what you do. It's, you have one partner and that's it. And you never think about it beyond that. Whereas actually, there's a lot to be learned and explored, and there's a lot more possibilities than that, whilst that could be explored. So really hearing that sort of it opens up the conversation for everybody.
Yeah, because it puts the client at the center, and then I get to say, and then what do you want, and what do you feel? And something I will come back to, a line that I will use a lot with different clients in different contexts, is I'll say, sexuality is not complicated. Sexuality is very simple. We want something, and that's it. We know what we want, but we make it complicated. We can turn it into this, tortured maze of logic where, you're only allowed to want it in a particular way, or in a particular fashion, or in certain amounts. And this is where you get the really, just the distressing notion of people desiring something, not allowing themselves to have it, or living in conflict with it, so that, I can do it, but I can't talk about it, or I can't be open about it. And what happens there, of course, that's where shame comes in. And also, it's also hatred towards self, hatred towards other people, because those are two of the forms of what shame does. And I want to bring into two terms here, because it's important to divorce them from one another, especially when we're talking about queering, which is, yes, we always talk about internalized homophobia. Don't we just love to throw that phrase around? I don't think it really does justice to the other component, though, which is queer hatred, and that's actually quite different. And I think sometimes, I think the silence around sexuality, or talking about sexuality, particularly queer sexuality, it can be internalized homophobia. It's sometimes just queer hatred. It's sometimes like, this is actually just fundamentally wrong. And then that leads me to, well, whose burdens are we talking about now? Are these the burdens of the queer person who, quote unquote, shouldn't be queer, or are the burdens of the person who's looking at them saying, I don't think you should be queer, which is not the same thing.
I have written down here two words: burdens and celebration. Because it's almost like what you seem to be representing, Ali. And really, thank you for all the terminology, the thoughtfulness that you're presenting here. I have a part that would want to book you for another topic or another conversation on queer hatred. And I find that you're saying so many things that are useful today. So thank you so much. And my mind likes to kind of go back to what is it that we're talking about. First of all, we are having the conversation that is missing to a certain extent, because we are saying that therapy historically and all therapies, including IFS, including not just IFS as a model, but all those ones who use IFS carry burdens, very likely to carry burdens related to queer phobia, queer hatred, homophobia, internalized, externalized in all variations and flavors. And first, we need to kind of go through all these burdens that could have been filtered through the model itself in ways that we don't even know. And as you said, Ali, most of maybe one way in which these burdens are showing up is in the discourse around the bad aspects of sex. Whereas you're saying it's very simple. I want something. And instead of celebrating it or finding a place where that desire, I don't know if want, I've got a part that's kind of saying, is it want? Because I can want things, but it's almost like to me, and maybe that's the question I have for you, is a bit of an expression of self-energy, that kind of spontaneous knowing that thing will give me pleasure. And you say P of passion, so maybe P of pleasure, but there is an element there that I can't really change. It's not that, I want this, but I can want that, or it's almost like, well, that's really my thing. And it's very simple. But instead of being celebrated, it's usually met with other parts. Yes, Ali, go on.
Well, I wanted to just, I think you're right, querying the word want, because I think there's a level below that, which is need. We have a sexual desire, a sexual drive, which is very rooted in our biology, that is propelling us towards sex with others. It's expressed differently in different people. Of course, we know we have much more visibility around ace people now, who it doesn't really translate into a desire to do anything with it, but the desire is still there, the need is still there, it's still propelling you. And then I think what's not happening is a conversation about, okay, if that's kind of like, if there's a very neutral need, it's not good, it's not bad, it's not burden, it's just there. If that's the steam engine propelling us, well, then where does that steam go? Then I think you can have a meaningful conversation about, is that being diverted into something that is burdened and takes you in one direction, or is it not burdened and then it will just go where it kind of very naturally wants to go in its expressions? And I think that is actually, really, do we have to create a whole new letter for this? No, you could actually put it into connection. You could. It's just that connection right now, I think, is framed very much as, like I kind of said before, I see that as, I love you, holding your hand, embracing, in the intimacy. That I can really see the framing of connection. But when it gets to, okay, now we want to take our clothes off and do stuff to each other, some of which is nothing to do with reproduction and is everything to do with having fun, are we still in connection, or are we somewhere else? And I don't know the answer to that.
Well, can you repeat the question? I wasn't expecting a question there.
Yeah,
I was still in listening mode.
Sure. So if we see connection as, I can definitely understand connection being framed as, holding your hand, embracing you, kissing, I love you, hugging. The intimacy of people who care about and love one another. It doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship. It can be, I have people I know who I have great levels of intimacy with, and it's not because we're in a romantic connection. But what about when our clothes come off and we start doing things that are now more sexual with each other? What happens when the sexual element is added to it? Are we still in the sea of connection, or are we something different?
My answer would be yes, we're still in the sea of connection. I believe, like everything, it could be a self-led connection, or it could be a part-led connection.
Yeah.
Sex can take many shapes and form, including when you say taking the clothes off, I've done some work and some research in kink, and some of the sexual practices there might not involve nudity at all.
Yeah.
So I believe we're talking about a special version of connection.
Yes.
That probably would want, I think if it's self-led, it involves an element of the other person wanting to be connected to that. So consensual connection, I think that's where I would go when it comes to anything that has a sexual energy to it.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about the conversation that we had about self-energy, Alessio, recently, and talking about that not just as so thinking about this in self-led connection, it's not that that's only self, because a lot of our parts have a lot of self energy in them too. So yeah, just thinking that that the self-led connection doesn't mean it's only self and not parts. And so that also here there will be parts present, of course. Parts.
Well, you both tell me what you think about how I'm framing this, because I frame it to my clients as, when self is now accessible, when self-leadership has kind of been made possible, that's kind of the power source, but you need something to actually use the power source to do something. And I think, you can have parts that are incredibly sophisticated and very, very highly functioning, that are doing things. We need all of our parts within our bodies, within our cognition to run our lives. But it's who's directing that. I think it's perfectly okay for there to be parts that kind of get engaged and start doing things, as long as you say, they're self-recruiting and they're self-resourcing, rather than the kind of the burdened version. And I can actually give an example from myself, if it feels okay to go there.
Yeah, please.
So my background prior to my IFS process and doing some of the, I can actually remember the sessions that were the final pieces of the puzzle that then unlocked all of the kind of self-leadership that then, everything proceeded after that. I can remember those sessions. They were all around exiles that I had that were very much holding, I don't matter, no one cares, I don't understand what's going on, very lost, very alone. And my early life when it came to sex was a lot of, a very grasping, please love me through sex. It's the very definition of a burdened sexual experience. It's like the burden is, I'm not lovable, I'm worthless, and the sex is some indication that someone loves me, and that is utterly burdened, and I would walk away from those sexual experiences feeling very bad about myself. So if someone were to look at that and say, I don't think that's very good for you, I don't think that's shaming of any kind, and it's not problematizing, it's seeing it for what it is. It's like, this is a burdened relationship you've got with sex, it's not giving you what you want. And then I did the work, and now when I'm engaging with sex, it genuinely does feel possible to go into a sexual experience with someone and for it to be open and free and very, very nice and very pleasant and caring right off the bat. And I met somebody last weekend where didn't know them, there's a Grindr connection, had a good feel for them. We met up, and I think like straight off meeting them, then walking through the door, we had this really, really good kind of nice connection. We had a really nice experience of sex. It was very relaxed, wasn't agendered, it wasn't pornified. It was very, there was what I would say a lot of connection, and then there's a lot of kissing, a lot of holding. We cuddled afterwards. It was real affirming of how much we had enjoyed the experience. And if I compare that to what I've been having like 6 years ago, it's like a really night and day experience. So I think that's the kind of thing I wish was in a textbook somewhere, where you're like, this is what it looks like when there's all of these burdens that make it something not good for the individual. They don't enjoy it. They're not having a good experience. It's just reinforcing all the bad beliefs that they're holding with themselves, versus this is what it can look like when that is not present. It would look closer to this. Obviously, it would look different if yep, go ahead.
The finger's out.
I have a quest. Finger is up. I have a question there, Ali, because I find this example extremely useful for, I think, anybody who will listen or watch this. And I want to kind of give you something to reflect on, just for us to tell us what you think about it. The P of passion. If you compare that sex that you had that was kind of an expression of burden somehow, and this latest encounter, what's the difference in terms of passion? Would you say that the more burden there are, the less passion there is? Or am I just making it up?
No, I think so. I mean, the experience that I'm talking about was very passionate, and both me and this guy had talked about wanting that. But it wasn't a pornified version of it where we were going through a rehearsed thing that was, for an imaginary camera. There was a lot of looking at each other's eyes. There was a lot of like holding. There was a lot of gripping each other. A lot of stroking. I stroked his hair quite a lot. And then after, positions that involve holding and looking at each other, even if we were in different positions, as opposed to, okay, like get in doggy and let me pound you until I'm done, or I'll get on my front and you can use me until you're done, the word use is appropriate there. I think you can play with that. You can play with the idea of being used and this being about submission and everything. I don't think that has to be a problem. I don't think that is negative necessarily, but it can be.
I think the key there is passion somehow. There is a certain formula that in a way unlocks passion, and you're speaking to that, to someone else.
And presence.
And presence.
Present, you were both present.
Yeah. We were both
looking
at each other, being with each other. Yeah. I wasn't in my solo decks or anything.
Yeah, because then, the same thing, like the being used or pornified, could be exactly what makes passionate sex for someone else. So I'm going back to this P of passion, which is what you brought here today, Ali, or one of the things you are, because I think there's something precious there, something that can help us and people understand whether the sex act that's being performed or engaged with is coming more or less from self-energy. Because I believe if there's passion, probably there isn't much burden around, but I'm just able to engage, be present, be connected, and so on. So still stuck with that P right now.
Yeah, anything going for you, Jude, that you want to add?
Well, I'm just thinking about passion. Passion is like, what are you passionate about? It is a, without getting a dictionary out and looking up the definition, there is something about it being a full system experience in some way. That's kind of what it's meaning to me. And so, and in your example there, Ali, with the parts-led experience and the self-led experience, it's so clear that with the self-led, it was about, this is what I want. And also, this is what the other person wants too. Yes. And let's come together and have this experience. So there is something, I guess I'm hearing passion is something about alignment within your system to what you want. And then that alignment with the other person, in this case, just the two of you, the alignment of this is, okay, great, we can do this with each other.
Well, nice segue point, Jude. Thank you. Because what about people?
What about people?
What about people?
Yeah.
Because, of course, the other thing that I do and I take a lot of pleasure in is creating my sex parties. So my sex parties are they're for men. They're based in London. They're no drugs allowed. I mean, poppers, Viagra, fine. But we're talking, this isn't a chemsex experience. And they're structured and contained. There are I've got like 13 rules. So if you're looking for just a kind of like a chaotic turn up, thrash around, leave, it doesn't work that way. One of the rules is around everyone turning up within 15 minutes. So there's this kind of containing process of everyone turns up, take their clothes off, and they go and join something. They go and join an experience that is there. Everyone's there together. And one of the other rules is around how you participate. It's about please participate nicely. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But if you're going to like reject someone, be friendly about it, you know, try and mingle and have a good time. So there is this sort of baseline expectation of how people are going to behave towards each other, which then creates an ability for people to actually be a bit more forthcoming and participate and relax and have fun. And when I'm kind of in the middle of all of that and I'm observing what's going on, everyone's just like, you know, I play music and there's lighting and sometimes there's candles and everyone's like really relaxing into the experience. And afterwards, people will often say, you know, that was so fun. I just felt so free. I felt so happy doing that. You know, I've never had an experience like this before. I've never been, you know, I was like, damn it, this is the best sex party you've ever been to. This is the best sex party I've ever been to. I'm like, oh, there we go.
That's why people should buy your book.
Maybe people should buy my book to read about it. But yeah, what I'm trying to do there is create something that's about an unburdened, happy, nice experience that everyone can be part of.
And the finger is up again, because I think you're doing much more than that, Ali. Because I'm going back to the first example you gave us of how sometimes, you know, we talk about sex, and if we don't specify what it is, it's usually heteronormative sex of a certain type. And I think it's somehow it comes almost all pre-boxed. You know, there is the box there of what culture and society expects the sexual interaction to be. So I think when we define connection and passion and all the C's and P's of self, they already come in that box. And then when we're talking about your sex parties, or we're talking about a grinder hookup or any other form of encounter, then there is not being codified. I think what you are doing, Ali, what I hear from your stories and from reading your book, is the clarity of the rules. You are creating the box. You're creating the system, the wider system in which each individual system can find their way. And therefore, passion and connection, compassion, the same thing going together, they can happen, they can flourish, but they don't flourish because it's unburdened. Of course, people have done the work, but also because you have provided that. And you said the same with this other sexual encounter. You know, you kind of had talked about it. There was an element of negotiation, boundary setting, that's usually not needed in other forms of sex that are more codified.
Or assumed not needed.
Or assume is not needed. Then it leads to
there's so many self-sees in what you're talking about with the parties. You know, there's the clarity and there's choice and there's connection and all of these things. I'm just thinking about how, you know, there's you know, when we talk in therapy about, well, you know, the critical mass of self in the room and the self-led container, and, you know, the rules that you have, that you are creating that beautiful container of self in which the play can happen.
Yeah. And there are people who I know can't gel with it, because there are people who will like, they'll say, oh yeah, I'm not really feeling this, and they'll walk out. And it's not because, you know, one of the things I do is you know, it is an exclusive party. I do kind of like, it's not just anyone who can come. So, you know, when people are, so there's a shallowness to it. There is a physical shallowness to it. I will hold my hands up to that. So it's not that people are kind of coming and going, oh no, there's this massive variety of people and I'm I'm not into what I'm seeing. You know, I have advertising of what the parties are, and then people will turn up and they will see that that's what it is, even though I strive to have variety and not just, you know, as I put it, I don't just want it to be a room full of, you know, white guys with six packs. You know, that would not be, to me, a very good party. So, but there are people who will come and then they'll be like, oh no, I'm just not, it's not working for me, and they'll leave, or they'll come and they'll stay and they seem to have a really nice time, and then afterwards they'll say to me, oh yeah, I had a good time, but I probably won't come again. So I think you can also, you can give someone like the best quality kind of experience that you can, and people can still have their own stuff that will mean that they're not able to enjoy it on every level, or they'll have a backlash against it. Maybe a part of them will say, you know, you liked it, but you shouldn't have done, you know, nothing I can really do about that.
Yeah. I notice we're at the 40-minute mark, and I feel like we could keep going, and there's so many more thoughts.
Yeah.
My head, I'm just firing off and just loving this conversation, but just as a kind of a time marker.
Yeah. I mean, I'm okay to keep going if you have any more things you wanted to get into.
I was just gonna say, yeah, just reminder of time, just giving you time, Ali, for maybe just see if there is anything maybe that we haven't covered that maybe we would want to get, you know, to mention. I just want to say,
and I've got a finger I just did a bit of dyscalculia there, of course. We're at 35 minutes.
35
Carry
minutes. Yes. So we have about 5 minutes. And I wanted to say this. Yeah, so, and I know this is going to be very unorthodox, but
go for it.
You know, the environment you're creating in your sex parties, I'm like, well, if you bring the same attitude to your therapy sessions, then of course people are free to speak, explore those aspects of sexuality, given the choice that they might find it the best therapy session, or they might not, or they might come back or not. But something about transferring the qualities of self that you kind of provide for a group of people into your practice and vice versa. I think it's a beautiful way of offering a space that is safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to embody this element in all parts of my life. Definitely do it within my work, and you know, I can think of a client where this client was very conflicted about their sexuality and how it had all how you know, the formation of their sexuality, sexual experience they'd had, shaming they'd had. And you know, there was actually one piece of work I did with an exile of theirs that meant taking an exile out of a kind of a sort of sexual play experience when they were quite young, and then they were like, where does this part want to go? And the part wanted to go to like a kind of a place where it could feel like its sexual feelings were okay. And I said, okay, well, how would it be to go to some kind of like maybe a, you know, like a Roman bathhouse where everyone is just kind of naked and able to touch others and do what they want? And the client was like, yeah, that would actually be really good. And we took this part there, and, you know, bearing in mind that this part obviously is part of an adult, but is a younger part. And there was a bit of a kind of, is it okay to do this? And I was like, look, you know, the model says what exiles need, they get. What they didn't have, they get. And I don't have any parts of me that are saying whether it's okay or not for this part to want this. So let's just allow that to happen. And that was a stage of healing for this part that was very important. You know, actually just its very organic, organismic needs and wants to be there, and no one to say that's not okay, you shouldn't want it like that, you can't have that. And the client was a bit taken aback by how far I was willing to allow that to play out. And I said, look, that's okay. Like, it's not for me to decide what the part can have and want.
And I can imagine parts of other people that might have wanted to block or judge whatever that exile wanted.
Yeah, because I mean, when you're working with an exile that's kind of like 9, and then this part is saying I want to be surrounded by naked people who are having sex, is like there could be parts coming and say, no, that's not okay. Like, you need to protect that 9-year-old from that, because that's where the damage was. And I'm like, no, the damage was it being like told it was disgusting and wrong and shameful, and that's what it's carrying. So its expression of wanting to be validated is to be in an environment where that's okay. Okay, well, that's what we're going to give it. There was actually a second stage that came where the part wanted to be, it was like, does the part want anything else? It was like, yes, it wants. Bear in mind that it was a male who was bisexual and liked older men. It was like, yes, the part wants to have an older man put a collar around his neck and belong to him. That's what he really wants. I'm like, okay, again, I'm not here to say that the part can't or shouldn't have that.
And the challenge that it would be for any maybe even for the same system of the client to allow that to unfold, or for the therapist, if it wasn't you, to kind of allow that and making sure that parts didn't come in to say, no, that's wrong, that shouldn't be the way, and again go from burden to celebration of, well, that is what that part.
And I think this is, in sex, it's a very easy place to get caught up on blind spots of, a higher part of myself is saying it would be better if this young part didn't want that. And I'm like, or is it a burdened part of you that holds that opinion?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not the part, and I don't choose. So, I'm just trying to follow not the letter so much, but the spirit of the model in guiding this part through what it wants. And we got it to a successful conclusion of healing. I feel quite vindicated in the approach I took. It was helpful to the client. That's all that's really needed for me.
Beautiful.
I kind of maybe a little bit of a feisty part wants to add, I don't need the validation of a heterosexual person to tell me whether that was okay or not to do that, bearing in mind that they get to sort of control the dialogue a lot of the time.
Sure. There have been more and more of these beautiful examples where your intuition allowed you to help the client and their parts, or the redo or whatever step of the process was to happen exactly in the way it needed to happen. And I see Jude doesn't have the finger up, but she's got.
I'm holding my own chin. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
You're just thinking about in that example. Well, there was loads. I'm thinking loads of stuff, but in that example, there was just that there was that purity of trust that you have there, Ali, where you are just like, that's what they want. That's what they want. And I'm just thinking about different IFS examples that are nothing to do with sex, and about an exile might want to kind of hurt another person or something like that, and we say, okay, if that's what they want, that's what they want. But I can totally imagine how here many therapists' hearts and client parts would get in the way. Yes. Because this is because of exactly what you're talking about, and exactly why this conversation is so important, because sex and passion is so underexplored in this model.
Well, and also the passion that can be not about love and connection with other people, but can be the passion of anger and rage. So I have another example, and it actually is exactly what you just kind of said, Jude, which is I did in my learning about IFS, working with the what the exile needs, I did see once the question of, is it okay to really let an exile have anything it wants, including killing people? And there was this sort of answer of, I mean, well, it can be good to ask, is that the best way to discharge or redo what the part needs? And I was like, not for me, not really. I dealt with a client who was sexually abused and didn't have the ability to talk to anyone about it, including in their family. The family kind of, in a way, was blaming them for like how they were behaving and not asking about what had happened. So they had to suffer through this by themselves and get punished for it. And they wanted to, you know, kill their sexual abuser in their own mind. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you not to do that. I don't get to decide if that's the right thing for you to want. You're doing it in your mind. You're not doing it in reality. So, well, you're doing it in your own reality, not the external reality. I don't want to problematize that either. I just hold this position of it's really not for me to decide, because who or what is influencing this decision of this isn't right? If I were to say that, where is this coming from? Where is this objective like framework of morality that I'm trying to reach for? Well, there isn't one, is there? Someone's created it, and that's not the one I'm trying to use. The one I'm using is what's right for you. What do you need? You didn't get it then, let's give it to you now.
Beautiful. Yeah.
You strayed a little into a different direction now. That was okay.
No,
love it.
I wish we had longer, but I think
I feel like there might be a part 2.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Ali, what do you say? Would you like to come back?
Please, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So then for today, we're gonna bring it to a close. Of course, Jude, remind me, how do we close the podcast?
Well, first of all, I just want to, thank you so much, Ali, for this conversation, which feels, again, like many of our conversations so far. It's like it's a jumping off point, and there's so much more. And so in a moment, I'll ask you to remind people where they can find you, Ali, and we will put those links in the show notes. But just before that, I just want to thank you so much for that, sexuality is simple, but we get stuck in this tortured maze of logic. That just love that. Thank you so much. So where can people find out more about you, Ali? Follow your work, read your book?
Yeah, main area is just, if you just go to www.alibushell.com, Ali, A-L-I, Bushell, B-U-S-H-E-L-L, and you can find a link to my media appearances, my own podcast, my book, that I've also been on Dan Savage. I've been on a podcast by dominatrix called Eva O, talking about therapy and sex work. Obviously, I'm sure you can imagine, like I'm an ally to sex workers as well, and their needs, which I don't think are very well addressed by the therapeutic industry generally. But yeah, so just go to my website and you'll find everything you need.
Thank you so much. Alessio, how can people find out more about you?
So, well, I actually got a couple of things to add to this episode because they're relevant, even if they might not be ready yet. So they can always find me on www.therapywithalessio.com. They'll find all my blog there, digital downloads, some infographics about IFS that people find very useful.
Therapists share with their clients all the time.
Oh, yeah, someone shares. Or someone, Ali, for example, might have it printed at the back of his room. What was I saying? But I also have some material that I've created for PESI as part of a mental health and sex summit, so where I speak about IFS and kink and IFS and polyamory. The details are not up yet. It's still in post-production, but it will be available at some point to download from the PESI website. And Jude, what about you? How can we find you and more about you?
Yes, why can't I ever remember my own website? Yeah, so you can find out more about me at my website, which I think is anchoredinself.co.uk. I don't have anything particular to promote at the moment, but that is where you can connect with me. Most of my work is around supervision and consultation, so happy to have chats about that, especially with any queer or neuro kin. Yeah. Is there anything we want to say at the end of today other than, I've just said thank you so much, Ali, for this conversation.
Well, thank you for giving me a platform for it, because, I think really it just sort of started off as a musing on my part, between Alessio and I as we were having coffee, and that he turned that into something, in this conversation. I'm really, really grateful for him for making this happen.
All right. Thank you then, Ali, and to everybody. See you next time.
See you next time.